The courtroom was packed. Federal Courthouse Room 9C had never seen this many journalists. Aisles were lined with cameras. Flashbulbs popped like lightning. Everyone knew this wasn't just another Senate hearing. It was a standoff. At the center of it, Senator J.D. Vance, flanked by two staffers, one worn leather briefcase, and the full weight of a federal subpoena. Across from him, seated high behind the mahogany bench, was Judge Clarissa Holden, a woman known for her no-nonsense approach, her obsession with secrecy, and her iron grip over classified information. This wasn't about a budget, or a vote, or even a policy. This was about one sentence. 4 weeks earlier, during a televised Senate hearing on intelligence abuses, J.D. Vance had dropped a line that made Washington stop cold. There are memos, classified memos, that implicate sitting judges in pressuring intelligence agencies to silence whistleblowers. The moment he said it, D.C. lit up. Intelligence circles panicked, newsrooms scrambled, and Judge Holden issued a formal demand: reveal your source or face contempt. And now, here he was, facing down the storm. The courtroom quieted as the clerk called it into session. Case number 52C-781, the United States versus Senator James David Vance. Judge Holden leaned forward, eyes sharp as razors. Senator Vance, she began, you stand here today accused of compromising national security by referencing classified documents on live television. The court orders you now to disclose the sources of your information, in full, or be held in criminal contempt. The tension was electric. J.D. leaned into the mic, calm but focused. With all due respect, Your Honor, the Constitution protects my right to speak on behalf of the people who elected me, especially when those people are being spied on, manipulated, or silenced. This court isn't interested in your politics, she snapped. We are interested in facts. J.D. didn't blink. You want a fact, he said. He reached slowly into his briefcase, pulled out a thick folder sealed with red tape. Here's one. He opened it. The courtroom leaned in. He flipped to the first page. Then, with perfect precision, he slid a single sheet from a protective sleeve and held it up. At the top, declassified per order 11582A. At the bottom, recipient, Judge Clarissa Holden. The judge went pale. J.D. Vance didn't flinch. This isn't from a whistleblower, he said. This is from your own desk. The room erupted. Cameras zoomed in so fast it sounded like thunder. Photographers practically climbed over each other to get a shot of what J.D. Vance was holding, a government memo, stamped declassified, with the name Judge Clarissa Holden clearly visible in bold black print at the bottom. The judge froze, not visibly shaken, not yet, but her fingers stiffened, and her eyes darted for the briefest moment toward her legal clerk, who was now sweating bullets. J.D. didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He simply laid the paper flat on the table before him and began to read. Memo 481B. Subject: coordination with judiciary contacts regarding federal surveillance oversight suppression. The courtroom went still. This memorandum serves to document conversations initiated between senior judicial officials and intelligence liaisons regarding containment strategies following unauthorized public disclosures of surveillance programs. The objective, per contact Judge Clarissa Holden, was to delay congressional inquiry and redirect legal focus toward whistleblower character assessments. J.D. looked up, dead at the judge. You wanted to know my source, he said. Turns out the paper trail leads right to your office. Gasps echoed through the chamber like rolling waves. Judge Holden gripped the edge of the bench. This court has not verified the authenticity of this document. J.D. was ready. Then let's. He reached back into the folder and withdrew 3 more sheets, all stamped with matching declassification codes. Here are the digital confirmation logs from the Intelligence Accountability Office, verifying this memo as part of a July 14 data release authorized by Executive Oversight Order 11582A. Your name is on all 3. Her gavel twitched in her hand, but she didn't strike. You're bluffing, she hissed. No, J.D. said. You just never expected anyone to call yours. The audience was glued. Reporters live-tweeted each sentence. The hashtag J.D. Vance memo began trending on Twitter within minutes. Then J.D. dropped the final card. I didn't leak anything. I didn't hack anything. I followed the law. And now I'm asking a question every American should be asking. Why is a federal judge pressuring intelligence agencies to silence whistleblowers? Judge Holden's voice cracked for the first time. This is not how this was supposed to go. JD stood calmly without being asked. "No," he replied. "It's how truth goes. Messy, loud, and unstoppable." Judge Holden's carefully composed mask began to fracture. She leaned forward, gripping the bench as if it were the last lifeline tethering her to control. Her voice, once measured and dominant, now trembled just beneath the surface. "Senator Vance, this courtroom is not your personal soapbox. You will not grandstand. You will answer this court's demands under the law." JD didn't sit. He didn't shout. He simply raised his hand and tapped the memo again. "I am answering under the law, the very law you tried to manipulate." The audience erupted again. Reporters couldn't type fast enough. News anchors across the country cut to live feeds. Cable networks pushed everything else off the air. Breaking: JD Vance defies judge with declassified memo. Subheading: mentions Judge Holden by name in explosive court standoff. Judge Holden's clerk leaned in and whispered something into her ear. Her face darkened. Then, slowly, she stood. "This document, if real, is a matter for judicial ethics, not a public circus," she snapped. "You think this memo will save you from contempt? All it proves is that someone within the system leaked sensitive deliberations to you." JD fired back instantly. "No one leaked anything. These were made public. You assumed no one would bother to read the full list of declassified files buried under bureaucratic code." He held up a small government-issued USB drive. "And just in case you want to accuse me of forgery, here's the full data set, available under the Freedom of Information Act. Redacted versions were published 3 weeks ago." The clerk rushed forward to retrieve the drive. The judge didn't stop him. She couldn't. Her courtroom, once a temple of silence and authority, had become a war zone of truth. A slow murmur filled the air as people started to realize what was happening. JD Vance hadn't just exposed one document. He'd exposed the illusion, the belief that the bench was always neutral, always above politics. And now the judge looked human, vulnerable, cornered. "I am placing this court in recess," she said sharply. "No," JD responded. "You placed yourself under question. I'm just reading what you signed." She stared him down. He didn't blink. The room was absolutely still. And then JD placed one last document on the desk before her, a sworn affidavit, signed by a retired intelligence officer, attesting that Judge Clarissa Holden was present during at least 2 unrecorded coordination sessions involving surveillance suppression. It wasn't just paper. It was a match. And the courtroom had already been soaked in gasoline. The courtroom had ceased to feel like a legal proceeding. It now pulsed like the war room of a collapsing regime. Judge Holden stood frozen behind the bench. The affidavit lay in front of her, unsigned by her, but unmistakably damning. Retired Commander Philip Reeve, a name known only in intelligence circles, had broken his silence. His sworn statement was clear. "I was present during informal discussions in which Judge Clarissa Holden advised redirecting legal scrutiny away from federal surveillance programs and toward the personal creditability of whistleblowers. These conversations took place at a private residence in McLean, Virginia, outside any authorized oversight channel." JD read the words aloud with surgical calm. She didn't deny it. She didn't stop it. She gave it form. The room didn't erupt this time. It froze. Even the loudest press voices went quiet, as if realizing the weight of what had just entered the public record. "You're playing with fire," Judge Holden finally said, her voice now low and brittle. "You don't understand the systems you're unraveling." JD walked toward the bench, each step slow, controlled. "I do. That's why I'm here." He placed a new sheet atop the others, this one different. Not a memo, not an affidavit. It was a printout of a Department of Justice internal email chain. Subject line: per Holden's request, delay compliance with FOIA item 4771-82. It had her initials, her timestamp, her directive. And JD wasn't done. He turned to the gallery, addressed the cameras. For years, the American people were told to trust the process, trust the courts, trust the system. But what happens when the system trusts itself too much and forgets who it serves? He looked back at the judge. This courtroom was built to protect the law, not protect the powerful. The judge looked ready to strike the gavel, to end it all, slam the door shut, drown the truth in procedure. But her hand wouldn't move. She was paralyzed by what had always kept her safe, control. And now she had none. "You think you've won," she said. No, JD replied. I think I finally made you feel what Americans have felt for years. Helpless, unheard, and buried in red tape. He stepped back. The only difference is, your name's on the memo. The nation was already reacting. Trending on every platform. The memo, Holden cover-up, JD Vance truth bomb. Congress members began releasing statements within the hour. The Department of Justice confirmed the FOIA log's authenticity by evening. And as Judge Holden stared blankly at the paper trail that had just consumed her legacy, a single phrase from JD echoed louder than any gavel. This is just the beginning. The courtroom recessed. But outside, the world was just beginning to process what had happened. Within minutes, breaking news alerts took over every major network. Explosive documents link federal judge to surveillance suppression. J.D. Vance produces declassified memo in courtroom showdown. DOJ confirms memo bearing Judge Holden's name is real. Social media feeds flooded with clips of the moment J.D. placed the memo on the desk. Thousands of veterans, whistleblowers, and everyday citizens chimed in. Even those who had never cared about politics were sharing the footage. That's what fighting for truth looks like. He didn't flinch. She did. But inside the judge's chambers, the scene was different. Chaos. Judge Holden sat slumped at the edge of a leather chair, her clerk pacing in frantic circles, muttering legal jargon like lifeboat instructions on a sinking ship. This could trigger a judicial conduct inquiry, he whispered. No, Holden replied flatly. It will. She knew. The damage was done. The affidavits were real. The DOJ confirmation was real. And J.D. Vance, he hadn't violated the law. He had used it. Exposed the paper trail she never thought anyone would find. There were 2 phones on the desk, both blinking red with missed calls. One from the Justice Department, one from the White House. She didn't pick up either. Meanwhile, across the city, J.D. Vance sat in a quiet, undecorated office in the Capitol complex. He was alone now. His staff had stepped out. The storm had passed, but he knew the real fight was about to begin. He took out a new folder, marked simply Phase 2. Inside were the names of 3 more federal officials connected to the memo chain. And not just judges. One was a deputy intelligence liaison, one sat on the National Security Council, and one was a current cabinet member. J.D. exhaled, not from exhaustion, but from decision. This wasn't about courtrooms anymore, it was about pulling back the curtain. Later that evening, J.D. made a rare primetime appearance, live. No teleprompter. The network had agreed. No editing, no delay. He looked into the camera. I didn't come to Washington to play nice. I came to defend the people who can't subpoena truth, the ones buried by red tape and silenced by fear. Today, one judge got exposed, but this isn't about one judge. He held up the now famous memo. It's about power, and what happens when it's left unchecked for too long. Viewership shattered records. In Judge Holden's chamber, she watched from her laptop, not out of curiosity, out of fear, because she knew what J.D. meant by Phase 2, and she remembered every name on those memos. The next morning, Washington awoke not to coffee and headlines, but to shockwaves. At 6:42 a.m., a verified government account tweeted, "I was there. The memos are real. He's not lying. PR." The post had no photo, no link, just initials. But it didn't matter. By 7:15, the whistleblower's full identity had been confirmed. Philip Reeve, retired Navy Intel officer, former advisor to the National Counterterrorism Center, clearance level 9. And now the man who had quietly but unmistakably placed Judge Clarissa Holden under the legal and moral spotlight of a nation. J.D. Vance was already in his Senate office when the phone rang. His aide answered. "Sir, it's him." J.D. took the call. A gravelly voice came through, steady, calm, real. "You exposed it," Philip said. "Now it's time I show it." J.D. didn't ask what he meant. He knew. Hours later, a flash drive arrived at Capitol Hill. No courier, no name, just a plain envelope hand-delivered to J.D.'s office. Inside was a signed video statement. In the footage, Philip Reeve sat at his kitchen table. No makeup, no polish, just truth. "They told me we were protecting national interests, but somewhere along the way it turned into protecting people, powerful people, from the consequences of their own corruption." Judge Holden wasn't alone. She was part of a system, one designed to distract the public while decisions were made in rooms without clocks, cameras, or windows. "You want proof? It's all here." He held up a file, then a flash of the cover. Nightfall 8, internal routing log. Surveillance Redirections 2018-2022. The video was sent directly to the Office of the Inspector General, the Senate Oversight Committee, and, per JD's instructions, uploaded to a secure public archive. The press exploded. Whistleblower goes public, supports JD Vance's memo bombshell. Operation Nightfall, the next phase of government exposure. Meanwhile, in a glass tower 5 blocks from the Capitol, 3 senior officials sat in a closed-door conference room. Each had seen the memo. Each had worked with Holden. And now they knew they were next. One spoke first. "We need to get ahead of this." "No," said the second quietly. "We need to lawyer up." Judge Holden hadn't left her chambers in 19 hours. Her clerk slid her resignation draft across the desk. "I can't be part of this anymore," he said. She didn't stop him. She just stared at the paper in front of her, the one with the memo's stamp still glowing in her mind like a scar. Outside, JD stood before a sea of reporters. "You can intimidate insiders," he said, "but you can't unwrite the truth." Then he stepped down and left the mic hanging in the wind. 3 days after JD Vance revealed the memo, Washington entered panic mode. Leaks, subpoenas, closed-door meetings behind frosted glass and armed guards. But nothing sent shockwaves quite like what dropped at 9:14 a.m. on a Monday. Nightfall 8 connects senior cabinet official to illegal intel targeting. Philip Reeves' follow-up dossier, a 186-page PDF loaded onto encrypted congressional servers, named names. One stood out. Secretary Dolores Wexler, Department of Homeland Security. Her signature appeared 6 times across coordination memos showing direct participation in domestic surveillance redirection, including collaboration with Judge Holden and other judiciary contacts. Reclassification of active disclosures is advised prior to seasonal testimony. DOJ channels may be used for misdirection. Memo signed D. Wexler. At the White House, the response was immediate. Behind closed doors, advisers scrambled to draft press statements that would sound firm without admitting guilt. One aide to the president reportedly said, "If JD Vance drags DHS into this, it's no longer a courtroom story. It's a constitutional crisis." Another chimed in, "It's already too late." JD, however, remained steady. He declined all morning show interviews. Instead, he went back to room 9C, the very courtroom where it all began. He requested time to deliver an addendum to the record. It was approved. Judge Holden, shockingly, appeared. But she was different now, quieter, hollow, a shadow of the force she once projected. JD walked to the center of the courtroom and held up the Wexler memo. "We were told to trust the process, to believe the courts were blind, the intelligence agencies were neutral, and the cabinet served the people. But what happens when all 3 link arms and face the people instead?" He turned, letting the gallery see the name. Dolores Wexler, current sitting cabinet member. Reporters filed stories in real time. JD Vance names Homeland Security Secretary in explosive courtroom reveal. Operation Nightfall expands. Congress scrambles for emergency inquiry. On Capitol Hill, a rare bipartisan coalition began forming behind closed doors, not just to investigate DHS, but to determine how deep the rot went. And in homes across America, people watched. Not as Republicans or Democrats, but as citizens. Because no matter your politics, the idea of secret backroom surveillance, silenced whistleblowers and complicit judges triggered one universal reaction. If they'll do it to them, they'll do it to us. Judge Holden, silent throughout JD's reading, finally stood. But this time, she didn't challenge him. She simply said, "Do what I couldn't." Inside the West Wing, a red folder was dropped onto the Resolute desk. Not a report, not a briefing, a subpoena, issued by the House Oversight Committee, directed at Secretary Dolores Wexler. The president stared at it, silent. Around him, top advisers paced like generals before a siege. "Sir," one said, "if you back Wexler now, you're tied to her. If she falls, you fall with her." Another added, "And if you don't back her, you're signaling the intelligence community that they're fair game." The president finally spoke. What about Vance? His approval numbers are surging. Independents are calling him the only one with guts. "Good," the president said coldly. "Then let's see if he can handle what comes next." That evening, DHS Secretary Dolores Wexler appeared on national television. Her eyes sharp, her tone measured, she issued a flat denial. "I have never authorized the suppression of lawful whistleblowing. I have never coordinated surveillance against political figures. Senator Vance is exploiting classified material to advance his own political future. But within hours, J.D. responded, and his response would go down in history. He stepped onto the Senate floor holding one item, a transcript. The gallery was full. Cameras were live. I wasn't going to read this, J.D. said, but when lies are broadcast on national television, the truth must follow. He opened the folder. This transcript is from a secure briefing held March 3, 2021. Present, Secretary Wexler, 2 federal judges, 1 senior NSA official. We'll label them as extremists if they leak, or coordinate with character witness suppression. We've done it before. Transcription sourced via internal audit. He turned the page. These are not words of national defense. They are words of political fear, of power, clinging to secrecy like a lifeline. He paused, then delivered the line that would trend for days. If exposing corruption makes me dangerous, then maybe corruption should be afraid. By morning, Wexler leaks trended worldwide, and for the first time in her career, Secretary Wexler was placed on administrative leave. The president held a press conference, tight-lipped, flanked by generals and legal advisers. He called for calm, cooperation, and clarity, but the American people had already seen what they needed to see. Meanwhile, J.D. returned to room 9C. It was quiet now. No cameras, no crowd, just a single envelope left on the table. Inside, a handwritten note. I resigned. For the record, I knew it was wrong, but I stayed quiet. Thank you for not doing the same. CH Capitol Hill buzzed with the energy of something unseen but undeniable. The Wexler leak had triggered not just headlines, but consequences. Subpoenas stacked, resignations rolled in. 1 federal judge stepped down overnight. A second vanished from the public eye. By now, everyone understood. This wasn't just about a courtroom standoff or a political grudge. This was about a system unraveling in real time. In a private Senate session, J.D. Vance sat at a long table with 6 senior legislators, 3 from each side of the aisle. The room was locked. Phones were banned. No aides, no lobbyists, no press, just elected officials staring down one of the most volatile dossiers to ever hit the Hill. This is real, one senator asked, lifting a transcript marked Nightfall 8 targeting modifications. Yes, J.D. said, and you're listed on page 47. Silence. The senator flipped the page. Saw the quote, Senator redacted will vote no if pressured with voter data. We have comms logs. Suggest intel drip to media partners if needed. It was dated, traced, logged, verified. J.D. closed the binder. We're not dealing with rogue agents anymore, he said. We're dealing with a system that built its own firewall, with judges, secretaries, and algorithms trained to protect power. The room was quiet, save for the sound of one senator whispering, God help us. Outside the Capitol, protests grew, but not in anger, in demand. Signs read, We want names. Stop the secrets. Truth before titles, we stand with J.D. A nation had found its voice again, and this time it was asking questions no one could dodge. Later that day, Judge Holden, in plain clothes and without security detail, walked voluntarily into the office of the Inspector General. She gave a sworn statement, admitted to everything, the memo, the meetings, the pressure, and in her final words she said, I thought I was protecting the country. I was really just protecting the powerful. Meanwhile, J.D. stood before the full Senate, not with anger, but with resolve. He addressed not just the chamber, but America. This isn't about Democrats or Republicans. This is about right and wrong, about sunlight versus shadows. I don't want a medal. I want accountability. For every American who was silenced, for every patriot buried in red tape, for every whistleblower ruined for telling the truth. He lifted the declassified memo one last time. This started with one document, but now we write the next one together. Congress exploded with response. The House launched a bipartisan Truth and Integrity Commission. Federal judicial oversight reforms passed out of committee in record time. And the phrase the Vance Doctrine began appearing in op-eds across the country. 3 months later, America looked different. Not in landscape, but in tone. The hearings were still happening. Indictments were in motion. Whistleblowers were coming forward, some quietly, others with fire in their eyes. But for the first time in decades, the veil had been pulled back, not by a leak, but by a voice backed by evidence. And that voice belonged to Senator J.D. Vance. In a nationally broadcast address from the Senate floor, Vance spoke to the people once more. No dramatic gestures, no attacks, just clarity. I didn't want this. I wanted to serve. But when a judge tries to bury a memo and a cabinet secretary manipulates surveillance powers to silence critics, that's not just corruption, that's betrayal. We were told these institutions would protect us, but what we've learned is that we must now protect the institutions from themselves. He held up the now legendary sheet of paper, the one that had started it all. This is what a reckoning looks like. Not a riot, not a conspiracy, just a document, a truth, a name. Back in Ohio, a retired Army sergeant watched from his recliner, his prosthetic leg resting beside him. He turned to his daughter and said, "That man didn't speak for politics, he spoke for people like me." She nodded, tears in her eyes. In a small town in Arizona, a single mom whose brother had been wrongly targeted by a national security watch list finally received a letter. "Your record has been cleared. We regret the error." She knew it wasn't a coincidence. In a law school classroom in New Hampshire, a professor held up the memo. "This," he said, "will be taught for the next 100 years." And in a quiet room at the Library of Congress, the document was officially archived, under a new exhibit titled "Truth Under Pressure, the Memo That Changed Everything." Beneath the glass, the original declassified memo, the affidavit from Philip Reeve, the Senate transcript from J.D. Vance's first courtroom showdown, a small brass plaque that read, "Truth is not treason." Senator J.D. Vance Judge Clarissa Holden disappeared from public life. Secretary Dolores Wexler was indicted on charges of obstruction, abuse of power, and unlawful coordination with intelligence officials. And J.D. Vance, he didn't run for president, not yet. He just kept showing up, reading the memos, asking the questions no one else would, and proving again and again that one voice, backed by truth, can shake the highest walls of silence.